to think, I'm going to start with an age of child that's a little older than we're talking about today. What is success at age 4? What is this at age 4? What's an indicator of success? Not peeing in your pants. What about at age 12? Having friends. What's success at age 16? Having a driver's license. Now, I hate to tell you this next one in case any of you are parents of young adults, but what's success at 20? Having sex. And what about success at 35? Having money. Success at 50? Having money. What about success at 60? Having sex. And what about success at 70? Having a driver's license. And success at 75? Having friends. And success at 80 is not peeing in your pants. So what goes around comes around. And this is the developmental portion of this session by us more behaviorally inclined people. So I'm going to run this poll. Launch the polling. The most important purpose of visiting a classroom is, and you have 4 choices. Remember, the question is the most important purpose. We're up to over half the people, 60, 70%. Good job, guys. 41 out of 49. Anyone else? 42. Don't worry, it's anonymous. All right, end polling, share results. Well, we have a tie to observe the child in the classroom and to build the teacher's capacity. And then we had 20%, 1/5 of us thought it might be to provide the child with some specialized intervention. Well, as we go through today's session, you will see that one of these is the one that I would have chosen. Cami would have chosen it too. Oh, we have one person said to determine whether the teachers are following through on what I gave them to do. So if Cami, maybe you can remind me near the end to come back to this these poll results. Not that I'll be able to find them or anything, but to kind of reveal or ask people what they feel the answer might be after having heard a bit more about CC2CC. Okay. All right. Stop sharing results. Get rid of this. Today, we might be talking about the need for CC2CC, the basic structure of a visit, the ground rules conversation, the matrix and the next steps form, Hoosier's rule, integrated therapy, relationship building, collaborative, no, we're not going to talk about collaborative consultation meetings very much, and checklists and other materials. So let's talk about the need for collaborative consultation to children's classrooms, which doesn't really work too well. The general rule of thumb is the top of the picture should be near the top of your head. Okay, so now everybody hover around over the unmute button. You know, it takes a while to get your mouse in the right place and all that stuff. Where's mine there? Because I want to ask you some questions, starting with this first one. Where do you go? We're now talking about during the precedented times, right? I will try to kind of balance out working with teachers in real life, because I hope that in the next few months, at least, you're able to do that. But I don't want you to rush it. And I'll try to balance that out also with what kind of support you might be providing virtually. But back to in-person visits. Where do you go when you go to a classroom? Anybody?
On the side.
The back.
Kimberly, you said on the side?
Sometimes.
Okay, why would you go on the side? It's a good answer.
All the other children want to participate in the same training. You know, whatever I'm doing, they all want to do it. And as soon as you sit down, all the kids sort of flock in, and then it's hard to do any one-on-one, even really on the side, but it's better than sort of sitting down right in the middle of the room.
All right, so good. So we will talk later about the 6 ways that we can provide services when we go to a classroom, and one of those is one-on-one in classroom, which I think is what you were mentioning, Kimberly. And but one of the good reasons to be sort of on the side, maybe it kind of depends on the classroom and the situation, is that we don't want to disrupt the teacher's regular routine very much. And you're right, that phenomenon of the children flocking to the visitor to the classroom does happen. Okay, any other answers to where you go when you go to classrooms? Carolyn Clark, I bet you have a really good answer to this.
I actually don't go to schools that often.
This is Katarzyna Klak-Kaniewski?
Yes.
Okay. You don't go to classrooms that often, but did you before pandemic?
Occasionally I would go to home daycares.
Yeah, they are a little different. I'm glad you brought them up, because I think home daycares are a bit closer to home visits than they are to classroom visits, because, you know, a bit less structure and that kind of thing. Yeah. Today, I'm mostly going to be talking about going to classrooms. Okay, thank you. Where are you from, Katarzyna, originally?
Poland.
Yeah, you know, I do quite a lot of work in Poland.
Oh, really?
Yeah, in Szczecin, near Czech Republic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Also, it's there are two towns that kind of sound similar. So it's Szczecin, right? Right by the Czech Republic, right?
Szczecin. Yeah. Thank you.
There you go. There is Szczecin also, which is very similar.
Okay. Good. Yeah. That's the one. Okay. Farida Punawala, what about your experience in going to classrooms?
I go to the playground.
What if all the children are inside?
I kind of set a time sometimes ahead of time. I think that when are your kids out? I think I want to see the kid out there.
Okay. And so why do you choose outside time?
I can see a lot of motor movement, can see some interactions with the other kids. There's plenty to see in terms of sensory, how the kid is behaving. So yeah. I'm an OT, so.
Okay. So that is one strategy that it's sometimes a little difficult to line up the schedules right. So am I available at the time when, you know, when the kids are outside or what have you? But it is definitely a strategy for being strategic about when you visit a classroom. And so the more structured the activity is when you go in, actually the harder it is to do collaborative consultation with teachers, because they're too busy running an activity. Circle time is a prime example. Because you'll see that in our model, communication with the teaching staff is absolutely critical when we're on a visit. And so, you know, in outside time, you can do that. In circle time, it's a lot harder. Who is your client, anybody, when you go, when you visit a classroom program?
Well, for those of us who are early interventionists, it's the child and their family or the caregiver. So it's a combo platter, right?
Okay, combo platter. I'm making me hungry just talking about it. So yeah, it's a bit of a trick question, because you're right that technically it is that combo. But what I really am going to be exploring, you don't have to follow up on this necessarily, but I'm going to be exploring, who do we think we're visiting? Are we visiting the child, or are we visiting the grown-ups? So we'll come back to that in just a second. How quickly do you make recommendations? So let's say that a teacher, we're talking to a teacher about some functioning problem that the child has in the classroom. And we're hearing about the functioning problem. And if you're like me, you are a nice, helpful, experienced early interventionist. And so the ideas come rapidly to me. And so how quickly do I then make suggestions to the teacher? And I'll just give the answer to this one myself. And that is because I remember when I was younger and therefore knew everything, that I would hear, I'd barely hear the end of the functioning problem before I'd be rattling off ideas, suggestions. And we now know that that is an expert approach to early intervention that does not necessarily produce the best results of our visit to the classroom. Who decides why the child can't do a skill? So I want to help you follow this path for a second. A regular caregiver of a child, that would be a parent usually, or a teacher, somebody who spends hours with the kid. That's what I mean by a regular caregiver, can tell you what the child can and cannot do in terms of functioning like other children do, or functioning like the family wants to happen in the home. They can tell you, yes, no, he doesn't use a spoon yet. He doesn't initiate interactions. He doesn't sit up independently, whatever it might be. They can tell you about these everyday functional skills that a child can or cannot do. So that's very important to understand, that the regular caregivers of children are our best source of information about functioning. Not a test that was designed to figure out who's delayed by how much, like a norm reference test. Those don't do a very good job of identifying functional needs. They do a great job at deciding whether somebody's behind or not, but not what the functional needs are. So we realize that we've got to spend time talking to regular caregivers to identify needs. So we find out that the child isn't communicating beyond grunting and pointing. The parent can tell you that. No, he doesn't use any words, he doesn't use any signs, he just points and grunts, and then has a meltdown if we don't guess the right thing. So we know we've got a communication problem. The parent can tell you that. The parent says, I want him using words or signs instead of melting down, or instead of pointing and grunting. The parent can tell you that. Similarly, teachers can tell you what a child is and isn't doing. But we don't necessarily know why the child isn't communicating all that well. So this is where we might need to employ the services of a speech-language pathologist to help us try to figure out why the kid isn't communicating well. It might be a speech-language pathologist, maybe a developmental therapist can figure that out also, but this is where the role of the specialists come in, is why children can't do certain skills. So we don't need the speech-language pathologist to come up with a goal. Do you call them, in Illinois, do you call them, the individualized things, goals or outcomes?
Outcomes.
Outcomes? Mm-hmm. Okay. In some places they're now, like in Oregon where Cami works, they call them goals, which is actually somewhat helpful because we have the federal child outcomes also that are out there, you know, same name. Okay, so we don't need a speech-language pathologist to decide what the outcomes are. We need regular caregivers to decide. Actually, the parents are the ones who make the final decision. But we might need the speech-language pathologist to help us figure out why the child can't communicate properly, and also maybe to help us figure out some strategies that address that reason for not communicating. Okay, so how do you word your suggestion? Lately, I've been hearing, I've been watching people working with families, and I've been hearing about working with families and teachers, where an early interventionist has so many ideas that they say, well, you could do this, or you could do that, or maybe this, or maybe that, or maybe the other. And so they'll throw out 5 things that would address the issue. And the parent says, oh, okay, I'll try one of those or whatever. And they don't really dig deep into what currently is going on and land on a strategy that the family is interested in, which is what we call sticking the landing. So you'll hear that we're going to talk about really maybe a different way of helping teachers in classrooms determine what the strategy is that they're going to try with the child. So let's talk about some principles from the routines-based model. Sometimes you'll see that's shortened to RBM. You know, anytime something is shortened to initials, it's a real thing. So the RBM principles, one is the teacher is our client, not the child. So that was what I was referring to on an earlier question. And the practice that's associated with that principle is talk to the teacher. Second principle is the teacher, not the provider, sets the agenda. The teacher sets the agenda for the visit by an early interventionist to the classroom, or to the teacher if it's over Zoom. So we use the next steps form, which I'll go through later on, at the beginning and end of the visit. The next steps form is like a documentation and planning tool. The primary service provider, that would be you early interventionists, address all child functioning, not just the area of the professional's discipline. So I need to find out probably a bit more from you guys about whether you're using a primary service provider approach or a multidisciplinary service provider approach. Meg, you're being really helpful to me because you're a very responsive participant here. But now I need to ask you, why are you nodding like that?
We use multidisciplinary.
Okay, then. All right. So in the practice for us in PSP, primary service provider, is that we discuss EISR, engagement, independence, and social relationships. These are the foundations of learning. We've been working with these as our main framework for thinking about children's functioning for many years, and there's a lot written about this. So we're not addressing things like speech sounds or motor skills. We're thinking about how is the child functioning. Another term for functioning is participating meaningfully in his or her everyday routines. And regardless of our background, we're looking at the whole of a child's functioning, which often don't fall neatly into the traditional area that one discipline addresses. Another principle is consulting collaboratively, not expertly. Cami, I'm about to ask you a question.
Ready.
This is always to give her a minute to find that unmute button. This is a big bugaboo for you, that you see expert consultation used quite a lot, even with people that we've tried to train. What does that look like? What is expert consultation versus consulting collaboratively as you think about it?
I think a perfect example I just saw the other day was a therapist was working with a family and had never been to the house. They were virtual, but it was in a house I had actually been in before. And the provider said something like, well, just put him on the floor for him to play, get tummy time. And I could kind of just see the parent's face just fall. And she picked up the computer and showed them the floor, and it was not, there was no room. There was it was not a pleasant floor, and I think the parent knew it. And it turned into this negative experience for this parent to be told what to do to help her child when it was not an option for her in the context she was in. So if that provider would have been able to ask some more questions to get at what might be a strategy this parent would be able to come to. And it's even more so important in a classroom. As we know, classroom teachers have a lot they're juggling. So if we were to just come in and tell a teacher, do this, without coming into taking any into account of the context of what she's got already going on, or that person already has going on, it does not go over well. So I think that's what I see the difference of being told what to do versus asking more questions to get a better understanding of some options that the provider might be willing or able to do.
Right, yeah. And so there are a lot of assumptions that go along with being using an expert model. You assume, in your example, you assume that the floor is a good, comfortable place to do tummy time, instead of exploring that assumption by asking a bunch of questions. That was a really good example. Thank you. So in our model, the practice that we use is called Hoosier's rule. And then we stick the landing. So it's not like we ask a whole bunch of questions and don't make a suggestion, but we ask a bunch of questions before we make a suggestion. We'll explain things like Hoosier's rule, EISR, and NSF as we go along. Another principle is employing action as warranted, not just talk. So our model has been criticized for being all about conversation, which is a fair accusation to some extent, because we spend a lot of time consulting with the caregiver that we're working with, the teacher, in the case of CC2CC, because that's how grown-ups interact. They talk to each other. But that doesn't mean that we don't have any action going on during a visit with a teacher. And so whether it's virtual, well, the teacher might not be with the child on a virtual call. So I'll find out a bit more from you guys about what these what your work with teachers is like right now. But in in-person visits, obviously teachers are there, children are there, and we have three demonstration possibilities. A demonstration of what the child is doing, a demonstration of what the teacher is doing with the child, and then a demonstration by you, the early interventionists, for the teacher. And in virtual visits, the demonstration obviously looks very different from what it would be in person, where we literally put our hands on the child for the purpose of demonstration. Let me ask you guys, are you no, let me start from the beginning. Are some children going to classrooms in Illinois? Yes, Susie, you're saying yes? Mm-hmm. Okay. And are you having visits with teachers right now? Molly, I see you're saying yes. And are your visits in-person visits to classrooms?
With some of the students that are there, yeah.
Yeah. Have the classroom programs limited, what's the right word, like restaurants call it, limited capacity?
Yes.
Okay, so it's a smaller number of kids, and they're probably, it's so ridiculous, trying to exercise social distancing among 2-year-olds is a bit of a joke. And are you supposed, when you go to a classroom, are you supposed to exercise social distancing and mask wearing?
You're supposed to try.
Supposed to try, okay. I think that you'll find that with this model, it's a little more possible to do that, because your primary target is the adult, not the child. Because with children, you know, you got to hold children, you got to get close to them, you got to hug them, but you don't have to do that to teachers. Okay, so let me move on to these steps to CC2CC. I think a lot of you know about the routines-based interview. I know Maria has done a lot of work there, and we've trained a number of people from Illinois on the routines-based interview, which many people think about that as an interview of the parents. And it is true, all parents of all age children, and by the way, the routines-based model goes up through age 5. So even with preschoolers that we work with in other places, the parent gets interviewed. So we want to know about home routines, mostly because even if kids go to some kind of a classroom program, they actually end up spending as much or more time in home routines than they do in any kind of classroom routine. But our rule is if the child spends 15 hours a week or more in the care of another adult, we need to interview that adult. We've had to be really flexible about the number 15 because there are some programs that only see kids for 11 hours or 12 hours or whatever, but they feel that they are having a significant, potentially significant impact on the child's learning, so we interview them. So anybody who spends a significant amount of time with the child has the opportunity to really affect the child's learning and developmental trajectory. So we interview the teacher. And once we've interviewed the teacher, we go back to the parent and some other technicalities that I'll tell you about, because ultimately the parent chooses the outcomes. Then we have the ground rules conversation, which we'll come back to in a minute, to make sure that our expectations about what happens during our visit are aligned, our expectations with the teacher's expectations. We develop a classroom matrix with the teacher. So that is looking at in what classroom routines are the different child outcomes to be addressed. We use the next steps form at each visit to document what we did today, to document what the teacher is going to do between now and the next visit, and to ask the teacher what he or she would like to be the focus of the next visit. We try to talk at the beginning of a visit to see if there's anything on the teacher's mind that the teacher wants us to address during our time in the classroom. And we sit near the teacher or the child, our target child, and talk to the teacher, not to the child. Well, we can talk to the child, obviously, but communication with the teacher is an absolute necessity here. So as you all know, that can vary from classroom to classroom as to how receptive the teacher is going to be to your talking while you're there. But if you guys can't talk, there's really no purpose for you going into the classroom. So this leads back to this essential fact that functional outcomes are needed. You can go to a classroom, but if what you're working on is really not a functional outcome, then it's not going to be of much interest to the teacher. And all the information that you might think that you're providing is really going to fall on deaf ears, or even if they try their very best to understand why this is so important, then they might or might not implement the intervention when you're gone. So ultimately, teachers have a lot of power. This is a very interesting issue in early intervention, that we in early intervention might have the fancy degrees, various letters after our name, especially you speech language pathologists with your C's and all those things. And so we seem to be kind of the experts in the model, and we are the specialists. We are the specialists about young children with disabilities and their families. But don't be fooled into thinking that we have the power. The people who have the power are the people who are spending time with the child. So we can do whatever we want during the visit, but then we're going to leave the child in the care of the teacher. And the extent to which the teacher actually implements interventions or does good things with the kid is outside of our control from that point onwards. So we absolutely need to make our visit with them the best hour of their week. That's a big challenge. And so we're going to try to help you think about ways to make it the best hour of their week. And it's ultimately for the benefit of the child. So the child is getting the best interventions because we did our best work with the teachers. So functional needs assessment is necessary if we're going to have functional outcomes. And so that is the routines-based interview in our model. If the child is in the classroom, then an RBI, that's short for routines-based interview, needs to be done with the family and with the teacher. They can be done together if that's possible, or they might have to be done sequentially. First the family, then the teacher, or vice versa. The family decides on the goals. One of the mantras for the routines-based model is the question, whose child is it? It's not the early interventionist's child. It's not the classroom teacher's child or childcare provider's child. It's the parent's child. They choose the goals, the outcomes. This process identifies needs in routines and more. So the RBI is all about the child's engagement, independence, and social relationships in everyday routines, including classroom routines. For home routines, we often get a lot more than just the child's functioning. We find out issues about siblings, we find out issues of family level needs and so on, and those get incorporated into the process of deciding on outcomes at the end of the process. With teachers and interviewing about the child's EISR, engagement, independence, and social relationships in classroom routines, it does tend to be, of course, a lot more child-focused. We're not writing IFSPs for teachers, like for their own needs. Child goal outcomes, therefore, have associated routines because we do a routines-based interview of the teacher. Every time we hear about a need, it's obviously associated with the routine in which it was discussed and possibly other routines also. Now we can create a matrix because we have the needs or the outcome selected and we know what routines they're needed in. So we can begin a matrix of outcomes by routines. And we'll show you some of those in just a second. Here is an RBI that was done with the family and a teacher to play cooperatively with other children. And this is the times of the day where this was found to be a need was at free play, outside time, playtime at home. Use complete sentences. Oh, this is for an older kid. This is for probably a preschooler by the looks of it. To use complete sentences when appropriate, meal times, car ride times, and circle time. Finish tasks. Art time, free play, and meal times. Label pictures, bedtime, story, free play. Help with hair washing without fussing, bath time. So there's an example of an outcome that only has one routine for obvious reasons. Parents have one night out a month for 6 months. This is the date, we call it the date night outcome. And it was number 6. This is in the list of importance to the family. 7, holds crayon with thumb and 2 fingers. And you can see the routines. Climbs the slide ladder outside and park time. Washes hands, going through all the steps. Hand washing times at school, which if this were in Tennessee, that would be like 17 times in a 2-hour period. It's amazing how often kids have to wash their hands in childcare settings. Puts on coat and pulls zipper up after adult inserts the zipper. So that's going out from home, going outside at school, and departure time from school. You know, school. Mother has information about kindergarten options. Yeah, so it is a preschooler, obviously. So that's an example of when, if you do an RBI to fidelity of a child who has obviously home routines, lives at home, and has classroom routines, you might get a bunch of outcomes like this. And see the hair washing time, for example, obviously that's not something that's going to be addressed in the classroom. And let me, is there any one of these that is classroom only? I don't see one. Do you, Cami?
No.
No, but it can happen. So we all know that some needs are occur in one setting, but the child is really competent at that in the other setting. And it can work both ways. I remember that early in my career, people used to assume that if we saw needs at school and the parents said, oh no, I don't have that problem at home, that the parents were not lying, that's too strong of a word, were not aware of what the child could be doing. But now we know that actually children vary their competence by setting. So we shouldn't assume that. It's also important when we're working with families who go to classroom programs that we don't say to them, I'd like you to work on such and such a thing, just because you know that the child's having difficulty with it in the classroom. You need to find out whether the family is having difficulty with that same skill at home, because maybe the answer is no. Also, home routines are different from classroom routines, and so a child's functioning is all about the goodness of fit between the abilities and interests of the child and the demands of the routine. So the demands, like take the demands of circle time. The demands of circle time are usually clean up what you were doing, come over to this area, get your carpet square, put it down, sit on it, stay on it. When I ask you questions, answer. When we do itsy bitsy spider, do something with your fingers and hands, participate in that. You know, those are the demands of the routine. Home routines don't have those kinds of demands. So just because we're working on the child's ability to stay on his carpet square for 10 minutes in our boring circle time doesn't mean that the family has to come up with some artificial thing that's going to interrupt their home routine to teach the child to stay for 10 minutes in one spot at home. Because even if the family is successful at getting the kid to do that, that doesn't necessarily mean that the child is going to generalize across settings with that same ability that the child learned at home. Okay, I want to show you now the kinds of participation-based outcomes that we get as a result of the RBI, and the how this then translates into our ability to make a matrix and work with teachers on these kinds of skills. So here we have Priya, who clearly is in a classroom program because there's circle, centers, and snack time, by staying in place. So what's her problem? She wouldn't stay in place, flitted around. Classic engagement problem. We will know she can do this. So here are the criteria now. We will know she can do this when she stays with one activity for 5 minutes during circle, one center, and snack in one day for 5 consecutive days. So the routines are circle, centers, and snack time. That's where the need for her to hang with an activity came up in talking to the teacher. And the target skill is staying in place, staying with one activity. It got reworded to. And the acquisition criterion, that is the criterion for knowing that the kid has acquired the skill, is when she can stay in one place for 5 minutes. It's a duration criterion. And the generalization criterion is during circle, one center time, and snack time in one day. So we're programming for generalization, not just for one routine. And then for we might have a day where she actually does stay in place during a circle time, a center time, and a snack time. And we say, great, we nailed it. Well, she nailed it, or somebody nailed it. But that could have been a fluke day. So we want to see that the kid actually has this in her repertoire to be able to do this. And that's why we have the maintenance criterion at the end. So some of you trained in the RBI might be very familiar with these, but I want to give you a few more examples so that we set the stage for how we then take this information to start working with the teacher. Quentin will participate in dinner preparation, free play at school, and playtime at home by playing with a toy, but no screen is allowed. And so here we have an example for this particular outcome. We have one school routine, and it's free play at school. But Quentin would have 10 to 12 outcomes, and so there will probably be other outcomes that are also targeted for school. We'll know he can do this when he plays with one or more toys with no help after being told to play for 10 minutes, another duration criterion. How long can he play with it? During dinner prep, one free playtime at school, or one playtime at home in one day for 3 consecutive days. 2 more examples, and then I want to ask you what questions you guys have. Rose will participate in the car ride home, circle time, and centers time by using 2-word combinations. Now, how are we going to measure 2-word combinations? Is it going to be duration, where we say that she is using 2-word combinations for 5 minutes? Well, that doesn't make any sense. So look at the acquisition criterion this time. We will know she uses 3 true 2-word combinations. So often with communication outcomes, we use a frequency, that is a number of something. In this case, the number of 2-word combinations. During each of these 3 times, so that's home, circle, and centers, in one day on 5 consecutive days. Last one. Sam will participate in going to school. Going to school means going into the school, going to the bathroom at school, and outside play by walking with his walker. And so how are we going to measure that? The number of times he does it? Nope, the number of times is actually the generalization criterion in some ways. Is it going to be the duration? Not unless speed is a problem and we're trying to get him to speed up with his walker. So it's distance. Anytime there's any kind of mobility kind of outcome, it's going to be distance. We will know he can do this when he walks 10 yards with his walker twice a day on 3 or 5 days. And if you have just one routine where mobility is a need, like getting from the kitchen to the living room, and that's the only time the parent cares about the kid being able to do that skill, then it can just be, we'll know he can do this when he, let's see, we'll know he can do this when he walks from the kitchen to the living room. Because, you know, that's an established distance. But when it's in multiple settings, multiple routines, we're safest doing a distance criterion. The only other criterion we haven't talked about is volume. By that, I don't mean how loud a kid is. I'm talking about volume, like in quantity of food or drink for those kinds of outcomes. Okay, what do you think of these outcomes? Do you hate them? Do you love them? Are they familiar? Are they unfamiliar?
Robin, would they be able to open up their mic and answer that question for you?
Oh, yes, 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 please do. That's what I want. Unmute yourself and answer the question. I'd rather that than the use of the chat room, by the way. That way we can all hear people's ideas and I can respond to everybody.
I really like the idea of the "we will know when it's happening" statement, because we don't always get that. We may get the outcomes, but not the measurement of the outcomes as clearly spoken as that.
Right, that's a very good comment, because that ultimately is what the purpose is of the measurement criterion on an outcome, is how will we know the kid has the skill? Yeah, thank you, Kimberly.
Hi, I'm a PTA, so looking at the last example of Sam, it does not say anything about how well he will do it or how safe it will be. It's just the distance. Yeah. So I guess I would like to see that it's done in a proper way, like he's going to position his feet, or he's not going to fall or something like that.
Okay, so if the family had said, I want Sam to use his walker without falling over, or with a better gait when he's using it, then that would have been the goal. Sam will participate in going to school, going to the bathroom at school and outside play by walking with his walker without falling over, or using smooth gait. Gait is a bit of a technical term, but you know, so for parents it might not be great. But by walking in a smooth manner with his walker. So it all depends what the problem is. This one, I can't remember whether the issue was that he refused to use his walker, or he was just getting used to using it. But the other thing is that while you're working with the teacher on this goal, you can say, well, yeah, he's walking 10 yards, but look how long it's taking him because he's so inefficient with it. So let's try to get him doing it, walking in a more effective manner. So in your intervention with the teacher, with the caregiver, you can still be working on the quality of his movement, if the original goal was just for him to be able to walk. That's a good point.
Sounds good.
Mm-hmm.
As an SOP, I do like the one with Rose actually specifying what that two-word utterance combination is, noun plus verb, because I think families and teachers or people in general don't always know exactly what that means. And some single word utterances can be used like to or interpreted as to. So I like the specificity in that. Yeah, because like we all know, thank you is 2 words, but there's just one sign for it, for example, and it's really not a true 2-word combination. The kid isn't learning to put 2 words together. Yeah, thank you, Sarah. Okay. I borrowed this from some work that I did with Cami's program. They are a very, very sophisticated program. They're also a huge program. What number of children and families are you serving now, and what number of professionals do we have?
We have over 3,000 families that we serve, and we have over 200 staff.
And this is one program in Portland, Oregon. And so I'm going to come back to establishing ground rules in a minute, but they do a lot of visits to children's classrooms, especially because their program actually goes through age 5 or to age 5. And so especially a lot of the early childhood special ed kids, the preschool age children are in sites, as they call them, their classrooms. But of course, they also have some infants and toddlers who also might be in group care environments. So the first thing we have to do is establish ground rules that I'm going to come back to in a minute. They also have meetings that they have once a month with their site teachers, their classroom teachers, which is a beautiful luxury. It's not always possible to arrange sit-down meetings just among the grown-ups. Often childcare providers and other teachers just don't have any paid time to do that. We also say that if you're going to meet with a childcare provider at lunchtime in-person days, you need to take them their lunch, because for you might think this is their break. It's not a break for them if they have to talk to you. The site visit core elements. So this is when you do go to a classroom itself. We have to review what the teacher has been doing since the last time we were there, create strategies for outcomes that we have not previously discussed with the teacher, or possibly revise strategies, unless they're going just fine, in which case they just continue them. Look for opportunities for the 3 actions. So we're having a visit with a teacher. We're in the classroom, and we should be able to observe the child. But is that just going to be us watching the child, or is that going to be us talking to the teacher about what the child is doing? And the latter is really what we want to have happening on our visits. Also demonstration of what the teacher is doing with the child. Again, yeah, I can sit here and watch what the teacher is doing, but if I don't talk to her about what she's doing, that doesn't, either now or later with feedback, that doesn't really serve any purpose in building the teacher's capacity. And then there's demonstration by the early interventionist. And that also needs to be done in the context of a collaborative consultation interaction. We don't want to find ourselves trapped into model and pray. Model and pray is where you're doing something really cool with the kid and you're looking out of the corner of your eye, so is the teacher watching me? And so you're doing this thing, and then you know, you finished your interaction with the child, and you sit back and say, good, I just modeled for the teacher. Well, if you didn't talk to her about it, she doesn't know that you were modeling for her, and she might not have picked up on the salient things that you were doing, the really important things that you were doing with the child. So that's model and pray, is where you model and pray that the teacher is going to do it. And it doesn't work that way. We did some early studies, and other people have done studies also, to show that it has to be purposeful modeling. And we call them the 8 steps of modeling, and you'll see those in our checklists. The teacher decides what to work on. So part of the collaborative nature of this is that we don't tell teachers what to do. We don't give teachers homework. We allow them to decide what they're going to try doing between now and the next time we show up. And they also, this is the bottom of the next steps form, they decide, they look at the matrix and they decide what they want us to focus on our next visit. The ground rules conversation essentially has, yeah, I am going to refer back to, Cami, have we actually used that establishing ground rules for CC2CC at MECP, or is this one of the many things that we developed and then just kind of forgot about?
No, we use it.
Oh, we use it. Okay, because I like the non-negotiables that are on that. I might pull that one up. So this is what the ground rules conversation is like. Well, let me state first why we have to have the ground rules conversation. In the late 90s, I began a series of studies looking at integrated ways of providing services to children in classroom programs. This is in the day, we had just done a national survey, and we found out that a lot of people were pulling kids out, taking kids out of the classroom to a place, a therapy room or whatever you want to call it, and doing their instruction or therapy in a separate place, and then returning the child to the classroom. And we were very interested in studying this. My colleagues and I were pretty sure that was a ridiculous way to work with children and their teachers. And so we did this study and got to know a number of teachers, a number of early interventionists, and we found some frustration between the two. Some teachers were frustrated with what their early interventionists were doing when they came to the center or school or whatever they called it. And they were frustrated in a variety of ways. Sometimes they loved the person, but sometimes they were frustrated. And often it was that the person would either disrupt the routine or give them unworkable suggestions. And then the early interventionists were also frustrated that the teachers wouldn't pay attention to them when they showed up, didn't follow through, or, various things like that. So we asked them, well, have you talked to the person you're working with about these issues? No. So here's all this frustration going on and people not actually communicating with each other about what their expectations were. So we set up a new rule for one of the studies where we said you have to have the ground rules conversation. Some of them went very, very easily, and some of them were pretty challenging. If one of the sides had expectations that couldn't be met by the other one. And usually that expectation was when teachers had expectations that early interventionists couldn't meet, such as, When you come, I want you to take the child out of my room and work with him and then bring him back when your time is over. We had to say, sorry, we can't do that. We have evidence that that is totally ineffective. And so, you know, that took a bit more negotiating. Sometimes if the child has a behavior problem, the teacher is thinking, oh, good, I'm going to get some respite because this person can take the kid out of the room. No, sorry, ain't going to work. So how does this go? We say to the teacher, I'm here to help you because you have Holly in your room. Not, I'm here to work with Holly, because you're not here to work with Holly. Working with Holly for the one visit that you make in a week or every 2 weeks or whatever the frequency is not going to do anything for Holly. So, and it sets the teacher's expectation. She's going to expect you to take Holly over to the side and work with her. Well, if Holly were older than 3, actually, I should say older than 5, maybe that would do some good. But a child that age is not going to learn anything from you that the child can then implement when you're gone. So we're not here to work with Holly. So I'm here to help you because you have Holly in your room. This also opens up the idea that we are going to talk to the teacher beyond just Holly issues, because children in classroom programs are in an environment that affects their engagement. There is how the classroom is run, how it's laid out, how the sequence of activities goes, and all of that. And traditionally in early intervention, we have been very focused on just helping the teacher with the child, which has made us ineffective because there's a bigger environment to take care of. And so often we can focus all we want on Holly, but if that classroom is run in a chaotic manner or an overstructured manner, then our work isn't going to do much good, frankly. So we have to find a way to establish a relationship with the teacher where we can talk about the bigger environment. Now that puts a challenge on some of our early interventionists. For those of you who trained in education or early childhood special education, this isn't quite as challenging maybe as it might be for the medical allied health professionals who maybe haven't had much of a background in classroom management or inclusive practices or what have you. But I think, you know, we all need to grow in some manner. And if you're going to be a good CC2CC implementer, you do need to know more than just how a child talks, responds to stimuli, moves, or what have you. I can help with the environment, activities, and ways to teach Holly and other children. What would you like to happen when I visit? You know, there can be a bunch of other statements in here. I'm just kind of getting at the most important issues that we want to have addressed in the ground rules conversation. What would you like to happen when I visit? And who knows what you'll hear then. So some teachers will have had experience with early interventionists, maybe even with you. You might be going back and having this ground rules conversation after the fact, because you'll say, I went to a tent revival meeting in Alabama. That's me, by the way. I'm at the University of Alabama. So in the South, that's what people would say. And now I've seen the light. I want to do things differently with you. So we have a ground rules conversation because we've never had one before. Or this is something that you do when you're first starting to work with a teacher. What would you like to happen when I visit, and hear what they have to say? And then it's also a time for you to say, here's what I'd like to have to happen. I need to be able to talk to you from time to time during my visit. This is a non-negotiable. I cannot be silenced on my visits. Otherwise, there's no point in my coming here. I'd like to learn as much as I can from you by watching and asking questions. So this is already making it clear. I'm not in here as the expert. You spend way more time with the child than I do. This is your classroom. I'm here to learn from you. I'd like to focus on Holly's engagement in all her classroom routines rather than just her deficits. When you're busy, I'd like to sit near you or Holly and interact with either of you. Later on, we'll talk about integrated therapy as a component of CC2CC, and that's where you're actually interacting with the child. I'd like us to fill out the next steps form before I leave, so we both have something concrete from our visit and I can make a copy for Holly's family. So the next steps form also serves as a way of communicating to the family what happened during our visit. Hold on one second here. This is the MECP guidance. Cami, is this on the, it probably isn't on the website, is it? It's really just an MECP document. Yeah. So expectations, what do you want to happen when I come to the classroom? Here's another one I didn't mention. Can I communicate with any adults in the room or only the lead teacher? And you really want to hope that it's any adult in the classroom, because sometimes it's whoever is nearest to you that you want to communicate with, but then you have to encourage the adults in the room to talk to each other. When I come into the room, I will try not to disrupt your routine. I will try to be friendly and helpful to all the adults in the room. I will try to promote children's engagement in your activity. So in your activity, we are not taking the child away from the existing activity, or we will not be effective. The regular classroom activities need to go on. So when I said, where do you go when you go into a classroom? You go to wherever the child is already engaged, because before you walked in the door, the child was engaged in something. We hope engaged. And whatever that something was consistent with the classroom routine. It could have been free play, child was in some area of free play. It could have been in an adult-led activity, it could have been a tabletop activity, whatever. It was still, wherever the child was part of the teacher's routine. So you want to have everything continue in that routine, so teachers can see how these interventions can occur. The interventions that you're going to talk to them about, or maybe even demonstrate, can occur in the context of their own routines. For too many years, we had early interventionists coming up with ideas about what the teacher could do if she takes the kid off to the side, like the early interventionist was doing. Well, that's not how teachers in classrooms work. They're working with groups of children as well as individual children as they use incidental teaching. They might not know it's incidental teaching, but that's actually what they're doing. So when I come into the classroom, I would like you to acknowledge me. Don't ignore me. It's not bad to do it. We had this actually on the checklist for how to get the most out of your early interventionist. Tell me how the child has been doing. Tell me how previously discussed strategies have been going. Tell me how I can help your routines go more smoothly, and tell me about how the classroom has been doing. The non-negotiables on this document are: I cannot take the child out of the room. I must communicate with teaching staff during the site visit. I must review the next steps form. I must complete the next steps form. Okay. Any questions about the ground rules conversation, or any concerns that you guys might have about it?
Let's just say you try all these things and it doesn't go to plan. Would you take it up to another person, perhaps the daycare? So for example, a person who, no matter what I said to the teacher, said to me, this is group care and we are not going to be working with a child in this way. And so moving that up to another level.
Yeah. So mute yourself, Kimberly. That is exactly what we have said. You know, if you can work out some friendly agreement with the teacher, then obviously that's the way to go. But if you've run into an impasse, then it's better for you to go to your supervisor and for that person to talk to somebody in charge at the childcare program, and maybe have for them to have a conversation about why we're even visiting there, what the purpose of our visits is, and how we're going to work this out. Cami, have you ever had to do that, or has it never risen to that level where you are? Cami is an administrator over a pretty big team.
Yeah, it hasn't come to my level. once it's been a clear conversation of making sure, I think the other really important part is making sure that you listen to their non-negotiables and determine if they are things that you can be amenable to. So as long as we're really listening, I think it goes well.
Mm-hmm. In my work on CC2CC, really around the world, the two extreme problems I have are people who went in and just did their own, early interventionists who went in and did their own thing, didn't really collaborate with the teacher very much. I think that at MECP, in a way, they were not exactly the opposite of that, but we've called them flyby visits, where people would show up for 20 minutes, not really do anything very useful for the teacher, and leave. And so it was sort of, you know, it wasn't that the person was too intrusive, it was the person wasn't actually helpful enough. So trying to get that balance in there is what's really important. But so, and Kimberly, we even at MECP, we have run into some issues, maybe not on Cami's team, but we heard about some very rigid Montessori teachers who expected the early interventionists to sit on a chair at the side of the classroom and not interrupt. And I'm not calling out Montessori necessarily. That just happened to be the model that was mentioned in these problems. So that is problematic. And in that case, you know, if the provider can't work out an amicable agreement, then it does have to go up the chain.
And I would also recommend including the family in that conversation.
Yeah.
Because if you know of a bad practice, it is our ethical obligation to share with them the way kids do learn and who their best teachers would be in that environment.
Yeah. Oh yeah, I have been guilty of basically getting another adult in trouble with the family because I told them what they're doing that's not really working well for the child, and so then the family advocates and does that. But we can't put everything on the family. But it is, of course, important to include the family in the situation, as Cami said. Let me diminish this for a second. Yes, someone have a question?
Yeah, sorry, I just have a question. In case if, and I just wanted to know if you apply this, is it some type of commitment that they need to sign when they agree to this? Because I had issues a lot with different teachers, and I bump into, you know, teachers who are very authoritarian and they feel threatened by the fact that you're there. And, you know, I had one that prohibited me of talking to the assistants in whatever situation it is. You need to talk to me directly to me, you know. But I felt like even the assistants can give me more information sometimes because they have the chance to observe more of what the child is doing. I have others that, you know, they just said, just take him. You need to bring him downstairs. You know, you can't interrupt the class. But I did also have other ones that they didn't mind. And I said, you know, whatever. I mean, I feel like if you're open to the program, then there is going to be a collaboration. But if you're not opening and you're doing it just because the father is saying the DT or the speech therapist is coming to work with the child, then I don't feel that there is not much space or opening to collaborate. They're not open to collaborate. So many times I end up talking to the supervisors. Other times they end up just telling me, yeah, I don't think this is working. So I might as well don't keep coming. So I'm like, all right. So, and that's what I'm saying. Like, if you go and talk to the principal and then the principal, the director of the program doesn't believe in what EI is about. And they say, well, then you can't come. But I mean, I found those situations that I can't see the child at home because of scheduling, but then the daycare doesn't allow me to go either. So it was really hard for me, you know what I mean? At the end, I have to find some type in the evening even to call parents and just kind of do consultation over the phone because there was no way to do it. So my question basically is do you sign some type of contract, or EI, is it by law that we need to do this? Like, or if they say goodbye, you're like, must well don't even insist. Don't even complain, basically. Otherwise, they're gonna kick you out of the daycare.
Maribel, you've raised some very important issues, and the first one about signing an agreement about our ground rules, that's a local decision. So in our model, we just say, no, we don't insist on it, but if that's going to help you, you can do that. I try not to make this look too legalistic, you know, but have it more just, hey, let's just understand each other so that we don't have any misunderstandings as I visit your classroom, you know, more friendly discussion. If we run into the problems of them not wanting us to be in there, that absolutely should go up the chain. And it's not exactly a legal issue, although on an IFSP, if it says, here's the difficulty. The education system, what's your lead agency in Illinois for Part C?
Department of Human Services.
Okay, all right. But the law that we're operating under is an education law, IDEA. And so the early intervention can't tell childcare programs what to do. And so if it's in the IFSP that the service is going to be provided through visits to a childcare program, then it's on us. We've got to figure out a way to be able to do that. The childcare can't get into trouble for that, but we can if we don't do it, and it's on an IFSP. So something has got to get worked out. And it's true that I actually would be the first to agree that if this childcare program is going to be totally uncooperative and it would be an absolute waste of taxpayers' money for me to show up there every week, then I need to find some other way of supporting this child and family. But I'll just stick to the main question about the signature. That's a local decision for you guys to make. Cami, do you have any? Do you make people sign at MECP?
No.
No. I think MECP, although their site visits, as they called them, were not ideal, they have been really pretty good about establishing relationships with teachers. And so when relationships with teachers are good, then, you know, it's easier to manage these kinds of situations. Also, I think we might be invoking the 10% rule here, Cami. I think that it's less than 10% of the time that we have a total breakdown like we've been talking about in here. So really 90% of the time, things are going to go pretty well. With new programs that have never had an early interventionist visiting before, they don't know what to expect. You're more likely to run into problems with programs that have had an early interventionist, and they thought that what your job was to go over to the side and work with the kid. And you're saying, no, that's not what I'm going to be doing. Then that's where wait, why are we switching models now? Let me move on to the matrix, because I'm, of course, as always, completely losing track of time. And Cami, do you have the PowerPoint, at least the original one that I sent?
Yes.
You might guide me in a minute as to where you think I should jump to. I wanted to show you guys the matrix that we have on our website, which is also a good excuse to show you our website. So let's go back here. The URL for this website is eieio.ua.edu. Maybe one of you guys can put that into the chat at some point, if it's not already in there. And so you should go here to read all about the model. But I'm going to direct you pretty quickly to materials. And you'll see that we have a lot of materials freely available for people on this page, and in various languages too. So I wanted to show you the matrix, and that's service delivery. Here we go, intervention matrix. Let's do a completed one. This is for home routines, but we'll just substitute classroom routines. Sorry, guys, messing around with all my controls here. Okay. There, that's what I was looking for. Down the left-hand side is the short form of the outcomes. So, you know, this top one, persist, would have been Danielle will participate in dressing time, meal times, and play times by persisting. We will know that she can do this when she tries 3 or more times to face a challenge at dressing time, 1 meal time, and 1 play time in 1 day for 4 consecutive days. That's the whole big shebang for a participation-based outcome. But the core of it is persist. It's whatever comes after the word by. Child will participate in this, this, and this by blanking. Persisting is what it said in this outcome. So persist is what goes in there. You can see all the other ones down here. There are 12 of them. And so it said that Danielle will persist in dressing time, meal times, and play time. So we know where to put X's now. And during the course of doing this RBI and figuring out where the needs are, the functional needs of this child, it covered 7 routines. You see that there is a column blank at the end because in any one RBI, you might not get through all the routines. So let's go to a classroom situation, for example. Instead of having these dressing things, we could have arrival time, circle time, free play, centers time, hand washing time, toileting time, outside time, music time, whatever the classroom routines are, is what would go across the top. And then the X's would go for the different routines in which these skills were needed. And the matrix is a very, very useful tool so that, let's say that you are going to be in charge of circle time. You can look at Danielle's matrix and look down. Let's pretend that this is circle time here. No, that wouldn't. This one here. That at circle time, I need to remember to work on her following 2-step directions and on her expressing an opinion without whining or crying. So you can look down the routine and see for this child, what are the things I'm supposed to remember to be trying to address during this time of the day. Yeah. Cami, I'm about to ask you a question. Is there any other essential information that we should give about the matrix at this point?
No, but I will reference also on the material webpage, there's a document on that gives you this information in a written form of how to use and how to complete it.
Oh, there it is. How to complete and use the matrix. I'd forgotten all about that thing. What date is it? Well, no wonder. It was March of last year. How am I expected to remember that? Good. Thank you for pointing that out. I wish I'd thought about that with all the other people today that I've been talking about the matrix to. Okay. The matrix is also useful sometimes when you're collaborating with the teacher. And the teachers, you show up at the classroom and the teacher says, I really want to talk about, this is Danielle here, about Danielle's ability to, her playing with something for 15 minutes. The very first question you ask is, at what time of the day are we talking about? Because we always have to have context when we're talking about a given skill. And the teacher says, free play. Okay, let's talk about it. And so you start talking about what Danielle is doing, what the teacher wants the child to be able to do, what the teacher's already tried. You're building towards being able to give a very meaningful, concrete suggestion in the form of, have you ever tried fill in the blank? And so then you talk some more about that, make sure the teacher feels okay about whether this is going to work and whether she can do it. And so now we're ready to move on to another topic. Now, this is if you have the luxury of having such a long conversation with the teacher on a visit to a classroom. A really good way of moving on to another topic is to go from what you were talking about to ask, are there other skills during free play that are targeted for free play that you'd like to talk about now? Or would you like to talk about her playing with things for 15 minutes at other times of the day? You see the vertical and the horizontal way of moving, making a transition. That's a pretty concrete way of using the matrix during a visit if you have that opportunity.
Robin, I do want to point out that it is 2:30, and we, for those of you who do need to leave, please feel free to do so. Robin, I know you've got a few more things that you want to share. Can we give an idea of if folks want to stay, how much longer that might be?
Was this scheduled to end at 2:30?
Yes.
Hey man, I was going to stay here till 4 o'clock. Let me just have a quick look here. Thank you, Maria.
You're welcome.
While Robin is looking, the next thing we were going to talk about is the next steps form. And that also, there's some written guidance on the website for that, how to complete it, as well as some blank ones. So that would be a really good place to read next, because it's often what you would do after the matrix.
I just had it. Yeah, that's it there. So yeah, go read about it. The matrix and the next steps form are the two essential things that you need for each visit to the classroom. So Maria, I feel comfortable having talked about the idea of how CC2CC works. Obviously, we were just able to scratch the surface on this. There's more to be said about being collaborative, not an expert, and also what to do when you're not actually talking to a teacher. But those will have to be in reserve for another time. The book Routines-Based Early Intervention does have a chapter on working in classrooms, and all those materials that are on our website. The website as a whole actually will give you more information. So I feel good about drawing this to a conclusion.
Oh, well, I don't. I want to keep hearing more, but since we committed to 2:30 in time, I suppose we should follow through with that. So I want to thank you so much.